There's growing concern about a virus rapidly spreading among farm animals in Texas.
We have seen positive reports at multiple dairies in the Panhandle.
What does it mean for the safety of the food on your table? We get answers from the state's agriculture commissioner. Protests outside the courthouse over the controversial Texas immigration law. And one comment from the state's attorney is getting a lot of attention.
Now, to be fair, maybe Texas went too far, and that's the question this court's going to have to decide.
We look closer at the impact of this latest hearing and what comes next. And the man blamed for a deadly crash in a school bus should not have been behind the wheel. Our investigation digs into how the state tracks drivers with previous offenses and how this driver slipped through the cracks.
Produced from the Capitol in Austin and airing statewide, this is the award-winning State of Texas.
Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Josh Hinkle. There is growing concern about the spread of bird flu among farm animals in Texas. This week brought a new issue, a human case of the virus. A Texas dairy worker got sick after contact with infected cattle. Washington correspondent Maddie Beertemple reports health officials say there's little risk to the public right now, but they are monitoring the virus.
The Centers for Disease Control says it's only the second time a human has contracted avian flu in the U.S.
This was an individual who had close contact with sick cattle.
Texas State Health Services spokesman Chris Van Duzen says the exact transmission path isn't clear, but it's possible that infected birds contaminated cattle feed, sickening cows, and then the person. He says the worker's case is mild, but the state is closely watching other infected cattle.
We have seen positive reports at multiple dairies in the Panhandle.
Cattle in Michigan, Kansas, and New Mexico have also tested positive, and the bird flu is affecting birds as well. The country's largest producer of eggs, Cal-Maine Foods, reported an outbreak at a Texas facility. The company slaughtered nearly 2 million chickens. While rare in the U.S., around the world from 2003 to February of this year, 887 people contracted bird flu and 462 died from it, according to the World Health Organization. The CDC says the risk to humans is low because there's no indication right now it can spread from person to person.
Really importantly, cows aren't humans.
Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis is director of the CDC's National Center for Immunization and Respiratory Diseases.
What we know to date is we have one case in a human, and that person is doing great.
Daskalakis says it is still safe to consume pasteurized dairy products.
We pasteurize milk for a reason, and that's because it kills bacteria and viruses.
He says people who work with livestock should limit their exposure to sick animals, and all of us should avoid handling dead birds. In Washington, I'm Maddie Beertemple.
While the risk for human spread is low, there are questions about what the virus means for the safety of food like milk and eggs. For insight, we're joined by Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller. Thank you for joining us.
Yes, sir.
And that's quite the studio you have there.
Thank you. I'm coming from my Ford Expedition studio today.
Well, thanks for making time. We're going to dive right in. What do Texans need to know about the spread of avian flu among livestock? Is this affecting the food supply?
Well, you know, I have a duty to protect the consumer, but I also have a duty to the farmers and ranchers. So let's talk about both. We've had an outbreak of avian influenza in a laying hen operation in Farwell, Texas. We're depopulating that facility, which we had 1,600,000 laying hens and another 377,000 pullets. So those are all going to have to be destroyed. We've also had it in our milking herds. First time ever. That's a first. We weren't expecting that. But we do not have to depopulate those dairy cows. They actually get over it in about a week. It's kind of like they have the flu for a week, and then they're fine. So those are going to be okay. And then the third leg, we actually had a human contracting. One of the dairy workers came down with the bird flu. Very mild case. He had like pink eye-like symptoms, and that was it. He's over it in a few days. Now, none of the eggs or the poultry got into the food chain. None of the milk got into the food chain. However, if the milk had gotten into the food chain, we pasteurize that. So the pasteurization process would have killed the pathogens. And if any of the eggs or poultry meat had gotten into the food supply chain, those are cooked. And so, the only way you could get it is by eating raw chicken or raw eggs. The only person I ever saw eat raw eggs was Rocky Balboa. I don't think he's doing that anymore. So I think we're okay. It wasn't widespread enough that we're going to have a run on grocery stores on eggs and milk. Won't change the price. It's not going to be reflected in a shortage or anything like that. So food safe, no shortage in supplies. On the farmers' end of it, we're asking them to increase biosecurity, have their farm workers use respiratory protection, eye protection, disinfect vehicles coming in and off the property, limit the number of visitors on the facilities, etc., like that. This is spread by waterfowl, so we're encouraging at least the dairy farms to isolate cows from ponds of water that might have had waterfowl on it, disinfect their own water troughs and feeding facilities.
Yeah, so you mentioned waterfowl. Specifically, do you know why this right now is happening? Was there a particular incident? Does anything need to change to prevent something like that from happening again?
Well, we had a mysterious disease going through our dairy herd in West Texas and the Panhandle. Went through about 40% of the herds before we figured out what it was. We were testing for cattle diseases. We've never had bird flu in cattle. Someone noticed that there were some dead birds at one of the dairies and thought, hey, we better test for bird flu. So we did, and it came back positive. So now we actually have it in 6 states total. But like I said, it's not a big problem. It's not going to put any dairymen out of business. It's not the end of the road. We don't have to depopulate the cows. That they have a mild illness that lasts about a week, and then they're back in the milking parlor, and we're doing fine. Some economic hit to the dairy farmers, but not enough to make them go bankrupt.
You know, this virus is hitting as ranchers in the Panhandle are already dealing with the aftermath of the state's largest wildfire. How's this affecting the state's agriculture industry?
Well, these cattle are in the same part of the state. It's also the area where we have our largest concentration of feedlot cattle, probably 10 times more of those than dairy cattle, actually. But the beef cattle aren't showing symptoms. They don't get it. This is only found in lactating dairy cows and only in the older lactating dairy cows. The young heifers, the pregnant females, they don't get it. So it's not connected to the fires. Some people thought it might have been the smoke inhalation, but it's not. The smoke went the other way, wasn't anywhere near the dairies. So we're recovering in the Panhandle, 2,000 square miles of burnt ranch land up there, 1,300,000 acres, almost 10,000 cattle burnt. We're going to have to dispose of another 20,000 is my estimate for burnt hooves and burnt udders and smoke inhalation. So we're in the recovery phase. We still need hay, fencing materials. My website is open for our STAR Fund. That's where we collect money to help these farmers buy a new fence post and wire. That's called the STAR Fund. Our hay hotline's up and running, and our mental health helpline is up and running. The Agri-Stress Helpline, and it's a suicide mental health helpline and resource to get these farmers and ranchers the help they need.
All right, good resources to put out there. Thank you so much, Texas Agriculture Commissioner Sid Miller. Appreciate you being with us.
Thank you, guys. God bless.
The Special House Committee investigating the Panhandle wildfires held 3 days of hearings last week. They met in Pampa near Amarillo to hear testimony on how to better prepare and respond to fires. The Smokehouse Creek fire was the worst in Texas history, scorching more than 1 million acres in the Panhandle. The special committee heard hours of testimony from dozens of invited witnesses as well as members of the public. Poor communication before and during the fires was one issue discussed during the hearings. In particular, the committee looked at the delays in deploying federally contracted aircraft to fight the fire. The goal is to find solutions before the next big fire. One lawmaker on the committee called on the state's Department of Insurance to act.
Why can't the Department of Insurance impose maintenance requirements on companies that provide these sort of utility poles, utility lines, and oil and gas equipment before they put it on these people's property? Why can't that be part of the financial responsibility?
I'm not aware of us having any statutory authority to
I
impose.
said, why can't they?
Chairman Ken King told us the investigative committee will have its formal report ready for the legislature by May 1st. They expect to work throughout the summer and the fall to prepare legislation for lawmakers to consider in the next session. Lawyers from Texas go back to court, arguing to restore the state's controversial immigration enforcement law. But find out why one comment from the state's attorney is getting a lot of attention from people who say the Texas law goes too far. And a truck driver blamed for a deadly crash with a school bus. But federal records show he should have been stopped from being on the road. We look at how he could have slipped through the cracks.